terrorists have also reports that he's going to be seeing films made that have been censored.
I think when I first heard about the Sony cyber attack, I was working on an animated film for Paramount at the time, actually. And it really rattled me because a lot of people who worked at Sony in animation or in different parts of the company were starting to talk on Facebook like, oh my God, my medical records are on that, and my payroll and my everything.
At the time, I was director of operations for my family's production company in Los Angeles, and we were actually in the middle of orchestrating a distribution deal with Sony. At first, we thought it was just a disruptive hacking attempt, but then when we found out that there were terrorist threats surrounding the release of the movie The Interview, it was scary.
Well, I was looking through the newspapers on the internet and, of course, came across the headline everywhere.
I first heard about it woken from sleep by a radio announcer calling to find out if I would be able to talk about it. So it sort of happened overnight for us.
The cyber attack against Sony Pictures and the attack against Charlie Hebdo were fundamentally in response to the same kind of thing, where something dear to the North Korean people, something dear to the Muslim faith had been satirised, certainly. It marks a kind of new weapon of terrorism, doesn't it? It's an attack on a different facet of Western culture, Western society, and hitting people where they would least expect it, which I guess is one of the most fundamental aspects of terrorism.
Stunning fallout after the Hollywood hacking at Sony.
The Interview may never make it to cinema screens.
Relentless electronic hacking attack continues against Sony Pictures, and a whole lot of correspondence and personal information that was assumed to be private.
It's a very slow thing, you know. The idea was that Sony felt like they had been hacked. By the end of the day, oh yeah, we've been hacked. And by the next day, it's like, oh my God, we can't turn on our computers. And oh my God, we're running around with legal pads and pencils.
So Sony's computers were basically taken hostage. Sensitive information was leaked. Movies that weren't released yet were leaked onto the internet. The ultimate goal of the hacking group was to halt the release of The Interview. They stopped the major release that they had planned, and Sony was forced to use different distribution methods, so they conceded. Not long after the cyber attack on Sony, in January in France, there was a terrorist attack on a satirical publication called Charlie Hebdo. Two brothers belonging to an Islamic terrorist group killed 11 people.
The Cartoonist was sitting at a staff meeting discussing the next issue, which was to be about Muhammad, and the terrorists broke in. Then they stormed up into the editorial room and shot them while they were sitting there. They asked people's names, that's right, they asked cartoonist by cartoonist, and shot them one by one.
How it affected my family, though, my husband sort of started to worry that that was a threat that could come close to home. If that's what you have to contend with, not just your own freedom of saying, well, I'm going to stand and speak and, you know, bugger the consequences, people nevertheless have their families, their colleagues, you know, the people around them. And I think there was a mood of that after Charlie Hebdo in the office, where at one point I did a cartoon, you know, after that was to do with the Indonesian president and the Bali 9 prisoners on death row. And I showed it to my editor going, is it okay to do this? You know, is this going to be provoking? And the editor said, we're not going to start doing things differently, you know, don't worry about it.
The attacks do have quite far-reaching effects. It makes people afraid to express themselves. You wonder if you're ever safe, depending on your opinion.
Censorship is certainly nothing new. Charlie Hebdo had been threatened before for the sorts of cartoons that they were doing, and they had had a bomb exploded several years before in their office.
Yeah, censorship in Hollywood is certainly not a new thing. Like in the 20s when the Hays Code came along, films got really conservative. Films in the earlier 20s were very liberal, for lack of a better word, and there were a lot more women filmmakers. Women drove the film business in many ways. When the Hays Code came along and it became a lot more conservative in what you could put on the screen, it also became conservative behind the screen. And you saw the absence or marginalization of women, certainly people of color. And talk about censorship. If you can't even get to the camera to make a movie, and you're a woman or you're a person of color or you're a minority of any kind, and you can't get to the camera or get $5 to make your movie, that's censorship. That's a form of saying your point of view doesn't matter.
So what makes modern censorship different from past censorship is, I guess, that everything is on a much bigger scale because of global communication. Everything is kind of multiplied by a zillion.
The events that have happened are going to create two different groups of people that are going to behave differently. Some are going to err on the side of caution and be a little bit more leery of producing controversial content. For instance, Paramount pulled Team America World Police because it also centered around North Korea. Then there's going to be others that are going to use this as an opportunity to let their voice out even more than ever and show these criminals and these terrorists that we haven't lost our right to free speech and we're not scared of you.
I think if somebody was going to be producing contentious content in the future, I think that they would run into problems all along the way. I think that they would probably find problems raising the money to make it in the first place because the ramifications are just too serious.
The early days of Hollywood were kind of wonderful. So Charlie Chaplin could go up in the hills, about a mile behind my house here, with a camera for a few days and make a film. And Walt Disney lived down the street, and he could go out with some friends and do some drawings and make a film of Alice in Cartoonland or Mickey Mouse. The issue is when there's money involved, because that's a different product. The commercialism of a film is really important now. And not just the commercialism on the screen, but can a film be spread out into a franchise? So if you're making films for a publicly traded company that's looking for return on investment, you're going to be looking for those things. Studios, by and large, the major studios, are forced by their mandate from the corporations that own them to make a profit. So is the car industry, so is the aerospace industry, so is the industry that made this chair. So that's not unusual. It's capitalism. What is slightly unusual is it's a highly artistic, highly subjective industry.
Freedom of speech and creative freedom is vital. If we haven't the ability to exercise creative freedom or freedom of speech, we can't, as a race of people, evolve. New ideas won't exist anymore. Without freedom of thinking, people will become more insular. We will go over the same ground. We'll never break away from where we are now. What we need is leaders in this world now, and leaders require creative freedom and they need freedom of speech. And without it, I'm afraid I wouldn't say that we're doomed, but we're not going anywhere.
Freedom of speech is another opinion. The more opinions you get about general issues, the more you can filter through and get the truth.
Free speech can have negative effects, but I don't think that means that we should start imposing laws surrounding it. When we communicate with each other, we share our thoughts and truths and feelings on things, and if I tell you that I feel contrary to something you believe in, it has the potential of causing an upset, but everyone is going to receive information differently, and that's fine. And I think if we're sensitive to each other, and we should always be keeping in mind what we're saying before we say it.
Sometimes I wish people wouldn't make movies about things, but I guess that's their right, and you don't want to say, oh no, you can do this and you can't do that. It's artistic censorship, and I certainly don't agree with that.
I think that censorship is something of a very grey area. It's something that you would consider to be simple, but where do you draw the line?
Well, you have to give people the freedom to say and do what they want to say and do. Having said that, I wish a lot of people wouldn't say and do the things that they do say and do. You kind of hate what they say, but you defend their right to say it.
Charlie Chaplin was brilliant at satirizing Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany, and it's not the first time that a country was satirized in terms of North Korea being poked fun at in a film.
Charlie Hebdo was a particularly virulent magazine. It not only attacked the Muslim faith, they had a whole magazine based on Jesus, one attacking communism, one attacking capitalism. They attacked everyone.
The reason that I feel North Korea and the terrorist group reacted so strongly to these events, while others in the past haven't necessarily, is because of timing. Currently, North Korea has a very active and present dictator. The terrorist groups, they have their leaders and their blind faiths.
Extremists look for extreme measures and look for excuses for extreme measures.
I think it's a kind of mark of how civilised a group is, whether you're able to respectfully discuss what you disagree with. I mean, it's back to the playground again. Oh, I hate you because you looked at me like that. Plop. It's not grown up, really.
In the wake of the Sony and Charlie Hebdo attacks, I think that there was a great resolve among many people across many different countries to maintain freedom of speech. I tend to think that in the back of everyone's minds, those attacks will live on for quite some time. And I think that that will probably temper the way we go about things, whether that's making movies, publishing newspapers or magazines.
After the attack in January, what I respect about this publication, Charlie Hebdo, they maintained their course. They did a follow-up edition that ran 8 million copies in 6 different languages, opposed to their usual 60,000 copies in French. The best part is they depicted Mohammed on the cover of this edition as well, holding a sign that said, Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie, which became the major campaign driver to bring awareness to the fact that that had happened. And in French, captioned, all is forgiven above his head. I think that's a very big thing of them to do.
There certainly was a quite collective reaction. The reaction straight away on social media, such as I saw it, was that from far and wide, cartoonists threw cartoons and posted them. They weren't vengeful, they weren't harsh, they weren't warlike, they were all just expressing grief and sadness and the kind of pitiable position of all we have to fight with is words and pictures, really.
You know, the Sony Hack and Charlie Hebdo and things like it are tragedies. As hard as it is to say, I think the world is a better place because of things like that. I would never wish that kind of reaction on anyone, but the reaction to it was so universal. And seeing political figures arm in arm walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris in support of freedom of speech, and the reaction of artists around the world, myself included, to say it's a fundamental right for artists of every sort, for people of every sort, to express themselves. If there is a good outcome of Charlie Hebdo, if there is a good outcome of the Sony Hack, it's the reconfirmation of our basic human rights to express ourselves, to listen, to have heated debate about issues, but not to lash out in violent ways. Boy, is that a tale as old as time.